Good morning, sir. Good morning, classmates. I am Christine Ocon, your reporter for today, and my topic is Phase of Authentic Assessment. So, what is authentic assessment? A set of method or technique for assessing the academic achievement of a student that includes activities requiring the application of acquired knowledge and skills to real-world situations, and that is often seen as alternative to standardized testing. So, remember, authentic means original, not fake, no? At the same time, it is real or genuine. So when it comes to authentic assessment, define it as an activity or a form of assessment which make use of a real-world activities. Real-world in the sense that there will be an actual application of the skills learned from a lesson. There is also a real area or a real situation where they can use the skills which they have acquired. So, an actual driving test is an authentic assessment. Is the best way to determine if you're gonna be a good driver. Simply passing a written test isn't enough to determine the driving ability. So, how do we incorporate authentic assessment in the classroom? So, for example, our students should be assessed by their artistic talents. Then teaching demonstration. Teaching demonstration inside the classroom whereby the classmates will be acting as the students, so there is a simulated teaching demonstration or teaching activity whereby the skills in teaching are applied in the situations. Then essays and class tests do not relate to the real world. It's because there is no application of the acquired knowledge and skills to the real world situations. And authentic assessment are the best way to determine life achievement. So now, what are the phases which you have to undergo if you would like to develop authentic test? In general, outcome assessment goes through 5 phases. Number 1, identifying the most important knowledge and skills that students should be able to demonstrate as a result of their learning activities. Number 2, determining the criteria and standards of outcomes performance and the acceptable evidence that may be presented as proof of outcomes attainment. And number 3, implementation of the supporting activities that will facilitate the attainment of the desired student learning outcomes. And number 4, measuring the extent at which the student is attaining the desired learning outcomes. Number 5, interpreting the assessment results and evaluating whether they indicate attainment of the desired outcomes and utilizing them for continuous improvement. So here are the examples of phases of authentic assessment. Phase number 1, identify the learner outcome. Example, recite a poem. In reciting a poem, identify that you want your elementary student, for instance, grade 4 learners, to acquire the competency in reciting a poem. You want them to recite a poem. The number 2 or phase number 2, determine criteria and acceptable evidence of performance. Example, the following skills should be observed: memorization, pronunciation, inflection of voice, gestures, and eye contact. So determine the criteria on the evidences that your student have really acquired the competency to recite a poem. So you have to determine specific criteria or skills. Now in reciting a poem, your students should have the skills to memorize, pronounce clearly, to have appropriate rising and falling of tone, or there should be the right voice inflection. They should have appropriate gestures and they should have appropriate eye contact. If your student acquired the skills, then these are evidences that they have acquired the competency to recite a poem. Then phase number 3, implement supporting learning experiences and instructional activities. During discussions, the teacher shows videos about how poems are recited, taught pronunciation of unfamiliar words, discuss voice inflections, and demonstrate different voice using the rising and falling of tones. Then uh, teach your students. So in teaching, you have to implement supporting learning experience and instructional activities related to the criteria that you have set. Again, with the outcome reciting a poem. Now, since there is reciting a poem during the discussion, you may show videos about how poems are recited. You should taught to pronounce unfamiliar words. At the same time, you should discuss how proper rising and falling of tones applied in speeches or in reciting a poem or in demonstration. Then phase number 4, implement assessment strategies. Determine and implement specific activity which will assess the learner's competency to recite a poem. Since the competency here can also the activity, then you will just have to determine the right poem which your student has to memorize and recite in front in accordance to the level of competency. Lastly, phase number 5, evaluate to determine attainment of outcomes and ensure continuous improvement. Use of rubric, preferably analytic, to determine skills which needs to be improved. Then this means that you are going to construct your rubric. Use the rubric and then assess your student. Preferably, it would be better if the kind of rubric that will we use is analytic. Why? This would be determine specific skills which your students need to improve, and this will help you out in going intervention activities for your students so that they could really master the skills of creating a poem. So that's the examples of phases of authentic assessment. What is traditional assessment? Are the conventional methods of assessment that has been followed since a long time. It is a simple approach that generally utilize a pen and paper. Most state achievement tests and high school graduation examination are also traditional assessment. So, for example, true or false, fill in the blanks, multiple choice test, matching type, standardized test, achievement test, intelligence test, and aptitude test. So, by assessing the students, they have to evaluate their knowledge through taking the examination of the school. Traditional assessment and authentic assessment. Number 1, a school mission is to develop productive citizens. Number 2, to be a productive citizen, an individual must possess a certain body of knowledge and skills. Number 3, therefore, school must teach this body of knowledge and skills. Number 4, to determine if it is successful, the school must then test students to see if they acquire the knowledge and skills. While in authentic assessment, number 1, a school mission is to develop productive citizens. So, the same sila sa traditional assessment. Then, number 2, to be a productive citizen, an individual must be capable of performing meaningful tasks in the real world. Number 3, therefore, school must help students become proficient at performing the tasks they will encounter when they graduate. Number 4, to determine if it is successful, the school must then ask students to perform meaningful tasks that replicate real-world challenges to see if students are capable of doing so. So, different ra gyud kay sila, no? In traditional, more on learning, teaching, and test. Then, so in authentic assessment, it is more on application on your knowledge and skills into the real world to become a productive citizen. So, even in the mission of the school of traditional and authentic assessment, the traditional stays in their traditional assessment. Then, on authentic, they pursue or they always apply the knowledge and skills into the real world. Basic differences between TA and EA. Attributes. When it comes to actions and options, traditional assessment select a response. This is an evident in different objective that like multiple choice, matching type, and true or false test. While an authentic assessment, instead of selecting a response, the student perform a task. There is an actual application of what was learned from the lesson. The number two, see things in traditional assessment is contrived, imagine, meaning there is obstruction in the part of the student whereby they have to imagine what they are reading so that they could answer the questions. Then, uh, an authentic assessment, there is a real life or simulated activity where they apply the skills that they have learned from their lessons. The number three, method. In traditional assessment, they just have to recall or recognize what they have learned, meaning they have just to remember everything that they have reviewed or they have learned from the lesson. Unlike in authentic assessment, it's not just a mere recall or it's not just a mere remembering, but they have to do, they have to apply, they have to construct. Then number four, focus. Traditional assessment is more on teacher structured, where the teacher is the one who constructed all the items in the test. Then authentic assessment, it's mainly student structured because it's the student who applies the skills that have learned from the lessons in the activity on in a simulated course or a real life situation. Number five, outcome. Traditional assessment has indirect evidence because it's mainly theory, it's mainly paper works, and it's not direct or actual application of what was learned. While an authentic assessment, it's direct evidence since you can really observe the skills, whether they have acquired it or there are some things which they have to improve. Those are the differences between traditional and authentic assessment. That's end my report. Thank you and God bless.